We pulled over on this section of Highway 49 between Angels Camp and Tuttletown to take a look at this vista of the Stanislaus River. Beneath the modern bridge and the speedboats is the flooded town site of Robinson's Ferry, which was established back in 1848. It's likely that Robinson's Ferry carried the famous person we're going to be talking about at our next destination, just a few miles southeast of here.
Welcome to this episode of History Hunters, where we come up Jackass Hill to visit, who am I visiting?
The Mark Twain cabin.
Mark Twain cabin.
Actually, it's the cabin of the Gillis brothers, and Mark Twain stayed here in the winter of 1864, and we stopped by and we're going to show you the cabin. It's not the original cabin, but it's recreated exactly the way it was back when he stayed here. I think.
Wasn't the fireplace original? The rest of it's not?
I think the fireplace is original.
Are the chimneys covered?
It's actually the second replica of the original, which was destroyed by fire. But we know that Bill Gillis identified this as the spot and also helped to oversee its rebuilding in 1922. That 1922 building fell apart in time, but it's said that the rock chimney is original, the same one that warmed Mark Twain that cold winter of 1864 and 65. This cabin has been associated with the Gillis brothers, who were Steve Gillis, William or Billy Gillis, and James Gillis. Mark Twain actually ended up here because of the friendship that he has struck with Steve Gillis, who was a typesetter with the Territorial Enterprise newspaper in Virginia City, where Sam Clemens was a reporter starting in September of 1862. That December of 1864, Sam Clemens and Steve Gillis left Virginia City together to work at the San Francisco Morning Call. Clemens only worked for the newspaper for 4 months. Meanwhile, Steve's brothers, James and William, or Billy, were mining for gold here in Calaveras County and set up in this cabin on Jackass Hill. This was called Jackass Hill because of packed trains with hundreds of donkeys that stopped here overnight on the way and to and from the mines. It's said that their incessant braying could be heard for miles in all directions. Some miners lucked out by finding pockets of gold, yielding tens of thousands of dollars. The mines played out quickly, and soon most of the population had left, except for a rugged few who continued prospecting, including the Gillis brothers. Mark Twain wasn't very popular in San Francisco because of his sharp attacks against corrupt city officials. Things changed for both men in late 1864 because of what happened inside of a bar on Howard Street. Steve Gillis was involved in a bar brawl, and police believe that during the fight, Steve conked bartender Big Jim Casey over the head with a glass beer pitcher, either injuring him severely or killing him. Clemens bailed his friend out of jail by signing a $500 promissory note to City Hall, but he didn't have the money to pay the bond and face arrest, so they both fled San Francisco. Steve headed back to Virginia City and sent Mark Twain to the cabin, where Billy and James offered to take him in as a hideout until things blew over. On December 4th, 1864, Clemens arrived here at this cabin. Can you imagine 4 men living in these cramped quarters? Because there was James and Billy, and there was Dick Stoker, their friend. In one of my videos, I went to the cemetery in Sonora, and I told you about the Dick Stoker grave. If you haven't found that video, then check it out. It's pretty interesting about Dick Stoker. He's buried in Sonora. Over here, it's one of those historical markers that the clampers put up, possibly. No, this is by the Tuolumne County Chamber. While he was here, Twain did some writing, and he stayed here until February or early March in 1865, and he became a correspondent for the Sacramento Union newspaper and his famous journey to Hawaii. As you know from our Aurora video, Twain hated the work associated with mining, so he had a reputation for being lazy when it came to mining, because as others were digging and sluicing for gold, Twain would rather take notes on them for stories later. While he was here, Twain agreed to help Jim Gillis mine for gold, and as Gillis did the hard work of digging and trenching and sluicing, Twain carried water buckets back and forth from a nearby creek. After a while, Twain was so exhausted and refused to carry another drop from the creek, saying, quote, "Not even if I knew there were $1 million in that pan." It's said that Jim Gillis dropped the pan after several days of rain. Some sizable nuggets were found when it was discovered by two other prospectors who came upon the site. And they sat on Gillis's claim until it expired and unearthed $20,000 in gold in less than 2 weeks. I found out later that Steve Gillis, who died in 1918, is buried in the family cemetery here on Jackass Hill, along with his wife Kate, who died in 1875 at the age of 27. Two of their children died not long afterward. Billy Gillis died in August 1929, and he's buried in an unmarked grave in the Sonora Oddfellows Cemetery. It's said that for years Billy would greet visitors to this cabin and tell of the experiences with Twain. As old men, the Gillis brothers published their memories of their time with Sam Clemens. Bill wrote and published a story on Mark Twain entitled Memory of Mark Twain and Steve Gillis. It is told that a thinly clad fellow knocked on the door one dark and stormy night in December 1855. It was future writer Francis Bret Harte. Jim Gillis let him in to dry him off and feed him. Bret said he was on his way to San Francisco by way of Sonora, but only had $2.53, so Jim Gillis gave him a $20 gold piece because he knew it wasn't enough, and Hart went on his way. While living on the hill, Sam heard the story of the jumping frog of Calaveras County in a saloon in Angel's Camp. His version would transform his life, and some other tall tales spun by the Gillis brothers and Stoker would find their way into Mark Twain's later writings. That short stay here in the Sierra had quite an impact on American literature. Time and elements took their toll on the first Mark Twain cabin, so the Sonora Sunrise Rotary Club in 2002 through 2005 restored the cabin. Somebody else coming to see it. On one of my trips here, I actually snuck underneath this fence and went inside the cabin, but it kind of loses its luster because it's not the original cabin. So there you go.
There
Exciting,
you go.
huh?
Did you get a picture of Molly the Jackass? Well, the picture isn't really showing up though.
What do you know about it?
I don't. There's a donkey that used to be up here, and he died, or she. Name was Molly. See, the picture is messed up.
My understanding was that one of the Gillis brothers is buried up here as well. There is a little marker over here, but I don't know who's buried here.
Her other people who died. I thought there was something about suicide. Do you remember if there was something about suicide here? There's an old fence or a wall.
Not sure if that's old or recent. The story is that if you're in a saloon, you hear a good story. Maybe if you write about it, you could become a classic American writer, such as Mark Twain. Heard the story about the jumping frog of Calaveras County. You probably know that story. It's about two men that made a bet on which frog was going to be able to jump farthest. One of the frogs was loaded with buckshot in its belly, so heavy that it couldn't jump. It was a classic, American classic, and it's believed that part of it was written here or thought up in the brain of Mark Twain. So we thank you so much for watching this episode of History Hunters. We are always looking for new subscribers. We would love to have you give us a comment and a like below. We always love to hear from people who love history like we do. Thank you so much.